That's so funny. I was muted to start the show. Let's try again. How long has it been since COVID? I still can't remember to turn my mic on. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, everyone. I am Tim, owner of The Brand Weaver, and this is Branding for Breweries, the show that brings in expertise from the brewing world and helps your brewery to thrive and survive and do incredible things. And as always, today is no exception because I am joined by the dashing Neil from SIBA, the Society of Independent Breweries. He's the head of marketing and communications, and we are deep in the middle of Indie Beer Week. It's not just Indie Beer Week, it's the whole Indie Beer campaign. And that is about driving awareness of those wonderful independent breweries and making sure everyone is supping on your glorious liquid. So today I'm going to be picking Neil's brains about how you brewery owners and brewery workers can make the most of the Indie Beer campaign. So without further ado, let's bring him to the stage. Everyone, welcome Neil. Da-da-da! Neil,
Hi, thanks for that intro. I'm not sure I can live up to that one.
Well, at least you joined the chat not on mute, unlike myself. Well, it was just one amateur.
I did have a moment of panic there where I was quickly turning up my volume and wondering what my system was doing. But yeah, so thanks for the scare.
I might have to do more of that. Each and every chat, I'll just like throw up like white noise and just really freak out the guests moving forward.
Yeah, thanks.
Anyway, mild human error aside, Neil, thank you so much for joining me on what is going to be a very busy time at the moment for SIBA with Indie Beer Week. I mean, how is it all going, bud?
Yeah, no, it's going fantastically well. It's difficult with something like Indie Beer Week. Obviously, it's the first time we've ever done it, and you kind of don't know what the response is going to be. But breweries have really embraced it. You know, we're here to kind of amplify what they're doing, and there's now over 500 breweries kind of actively enrolled in the campaign. I think 520, something like that. And the response has been fantastic. You know, there's beer festivals, there's tap takeovers, tastings, all sorts of stuff happening all over the UK. So yeah, kind of wherever you are, there'll be something going on pretty much. So yeah, really good so far.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I'm deeply immersed in the beer culture, but I can't move without seeing an indie beer event, which is the main thing, right? That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
But let's get stuck into this. So the indie beer campaign, which is what I wanted to talk to you about today. Hopefully, most people would have heard of it by now. But if not, what's it about? How was it created? How was it born? And what are you trying to achieve with it, Neil?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, we are the site of independent brewers and associates. We represent trade associations in the UK, but we've never really kind of gone into the consumer side of things. We've never really spoken directly to beer drinkers. We were kind of on the trade side, but we felt that actually, in order for independent beer to get the market share that it deserves, currently has about 6 or 7% of the market, but actually we'd seen that where independent beer is sold kind of freely alongside globals, nearly dropped my water there, sorry, where it's sold freely alongside globals, actually it gets about 30% of sales. So 30% of people will go in there, they'll choose the independent beer over a global. So about 70% of people drinking global lagers, Guinness, that sort of thing, which is absolutely fine. What we're saying is that there's room for everybody. So we felt there's something wrong there. It was like, well, why is there such a gap between what independent beer actually has, 6 or 7%, and what it kind of should get on a fair playing field? So we decided to do a consumer campaign. The reason we went with indie beer, we did some research around, what do people think of when they think of independent businesses? So is that something that's positive? Is that something that people want to support? We hear a lot kind of during COVID of people supporting local businesses, supporting independents, but how do they feel about it? Well, actually, when we did the research via YouGov, we found that what people associate with the word independent and with independent businesses was really positive stuff. The top answers were kind of handmade, run by real people, local, quality product, all that type of stuff. So we're like, right, well, clearly independent is something that people want to be purchasing. It's clearly something that's really positive. So again, why is there such a gap between the market share and where it should be? And what we felt and what our inkling was that people thought they were supporting independent. Actually, they were going into a pub, they were buying a beer, they were buying something which they thought was local, but it wasn't. So again, back with YouGov in the kind of research development stage of the campaign, we looked into whether people were a bit confused as to what an independent beer really was. So we We showed them kind of 5 genuine independent brands, so relatively well-known independent brands such as Vocation, Fine Ales, 5 Points, beers that they might be able to find in a kind of supermarket or in a tap room or bottle shop, that sort of thing. And then we showed them 5 other beers which were from global breweries. So essentially beers that were from breweries that used to be independent and are now owned by a global. So companies such as Beavertown, Camden, Doombar, London Pride, those types of products. And we asked them, okay, which of these 10 do you think are independent? And actually, the number one answer, the most popular answer was Beavertown Neck Oil. It's about 40% of people said Beavertown Neck Oil, that's an independent brewery. And we were really clear in what we asked. We said, which of these are independent? And by independent, we mean not owned by Heineken, Carlsberg, Molson Coors, whatever. So clearly people were confused. We then asked them, knowing that, so actually, we kind of then, pulled the curtain back and said, actually, these 5 brands here are not independent. They were, but they're now not independent. They're owned by globals. Knowing that, do you think consumers are being misled? And actually, 75% of people said, yeah, we think consumers are being misled by this. And it was 81% of beer drinkers. So beer drinkers felt even more strongly about it. So for us, that was kind of the green light. It was, people are confused as to what's independent and they do care. So we launched the Indie Beer campaign. The premise of this is essentially to ensure that every single pound that someone's trying to spend with an independent brewery is actually going to an independent brewery. It's all about transparency. It's all about highlighting genuine independent breweries and perhaps kind of shining a light on some of those brands which are out there, which people might think are independent, which are not. So I won't say that was an elevator pitch because I got rambled on for a little bit there, but that in a nutshell is what it is. That's how we developed the campaign, and that's what we set out to do in launching it.
Amazing. And then some crazy stats there as well about, how many consumers feel that they've been misled or deceived in that respect. And I'm just trying to think from your global beer kind of perspective where, yeah, I can see there's a marketing benefit maybe to not pushing the idea that you've been acquired by Big Beer, because almost in the back of their minds, they go, yeah, we know it's going to be frowned on, but you're not going to have much control over that, are you? So that's why you're...
No, exactly. And the thing is, like I say, 70% of people don't care. 70% of people are like, do you know what? I like a Guinness. I want a pint of Heineken. Absolutely fine. What we're saying is there's room for everybody in this market. What this is about is those 30% of people who are trying to buy independent, who actually want to choose an independent product, whether it's a cask beer or whether they want a keg pale ale, whatever it is, they're trying to choose a local product. And we want that money to be going to genuinely independent breweries, because the problem is that, a lot of the craft brands that are owned by the globals, they're kind of associated with locality. So, think of Beavertown, it's well known as being, a London brewery. I think Tottenham, Beavertown originally. Obviously, Camden is there in the name. London Pride, Sharps Doombar. They talk about Cornwall within that. Might not necessarily be brewed there, but it's there in the branding. So we just felt that was slightly misleading people. If someone's coming into my local cricket club's a great example. You walk in and there's London Pride. I think it was Meantime Pale Ale that was on last time I was in there, and then Asahi Super Dry and Pilsner Urquell from the Czech Republic or from Czech. Well, I'm pretty sure I'm down in Surrey, and I think some people walking into there was go, do you know what? I'm gonna go for a pint of London Pride, or I'm gonna go for a pint of Meantime London Pale Ale because I'm in the outskirts of London. I want to choose a local beer, and we feel that a lot of people wouldn't know that all of those beers are owned by Asahi in Japan. All that money is going to Asahi in Japan. It's not supporting local economy. It's not supporting local businesses. And for us, we feel that that's not right. So, people should be made aware. If you know, and then you drink it, you're like, do you know, I still really like that beer. I'm going to carry on drinking it. Absolutely fine. We've got no problem with that.
No, you're just making an informed choice at that point, aren't you?
Exactly.
And even the research that you put into the terminology of independent, I think one of the biggest things, and I've heard you talk about it before as well, it's just like the definition of what craft is. It's such a broad, ambiguous term. People say it's states inspired, but it's much easier to say if you're independent, right? There's no real gray area, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the difficulty we had with craft beer is that obviously it's a terminology which kind of came from America. I've been working in the beer industry for a while. I was a kind of beer blogger before I kind of worked professionally in the industry, and I was around when we were all kind of throwing around this terminology and talking about what it meant. And the problem is that trying to apply terminology as it was from America to the UK didn't quite work, because when craft beer was launched here, whatever, started being used here, it was kind of a pushback against the establishment, and it was a pushback against all those kind of traditional cask beer breweries. It was like, no, we're not that. We're brewing keg beer. It's American style. It's craft beer. It's different. But actually, at its crux, even in America, it was about small independent breweries making interesting beer. And how is that not cask? Obviously, it is. You can't say that Timothy Taylor's is not a craft beer. So it didn't quite apply. And I think what that allowed a crack in the armor, and then the globals could get in there and exploit it. It's not particularly kind of defensible in the UK, craft beer. That's not to say it's not a useful term. It can be useful from a marketing point of view, and actually some of our members would still use kind of craft beer. If you're thinking about your Google searches, that sort of thing, it might be useful to still have some mention of craft beer on your website if that's what people are searching. But actually, we think that indie beer and independent beer is something which is much more valuable, much more defensible. We've got a clear definition of what that means. So that's what we're trying to push. I also think there's a little bit of, and we picked kind of when we launched, I think this was kind of something that the Guardian really picked up on. I think there was a little bit of kind of fatigue with this kind of silliness of craft beer as well. I think, double milkshake, sour IPAs and all this sort of stuff. Not that there's not a place for those types of beers, but I think your average beer drinker was a bit like, oh, this is just getting a bit silly now. So when we kind of came out with this indie beer, and Pete Brown wrote a brilliant article for the Sunday Times about Indie Beer Week and kind of craft beer fatigue and all that type of stuff. And he wrote that, it was craft beer's dead, long live indie beer. And that kind of sentiment, I think, has gone down really well with people. It's just something really simple. It's catchy. You immediately get what we're talking about. And I think that's really, really helped the campaign as well.
And so you did the research. The stats were clearly there. People were looking for a clearer indication as to what is truly indie. The campaign launched. And so what were you doing to raise awareness? Or sorry, what are you doing to raise awareness? And probably even more importantly, is it working? Like, what's happening from it?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is, we're a not-for-profit trade association in SEBA. We do not have the resources of the global beer companies. We're a very small team. So what we had to do is we had to really lean into amplifying what our members were doing, amplifying what breweries in general were doing. So our campaign was all about press, essentially. So when we launched, we were really leaning into press, not just in terms of getting kind of national press coverage, but actually kind of empowering the stories locally as well. So what we did essentially was get in touch with as many breweries as we could, encouraging non-members to get involved as well. But with the SEBA membership saying, right, sign up and support the campaign, get ready for the launch, give us quotes about why you think this is important, why you can support this. So what that meant was that when we launched, we actually had 9 different regions around the UK where we could send a localized press release saying, right, this campaign's launching. Here are the breweries in the area that are supporting it. Here's some, quotes from Attic Brewery in Birmingham and Bullhouse Brewery in Northern Ireland and, Cloudwater in Manchester and whatever across the whole of the country. And that really got people interested, and it really got brilliant local press coverage. And that kind of launched the campaign. And obviously there's some great stuff in the national press as well. The Guardian did some brilliant pieces, including a Guardian editorial. So in a week where, I think there was the US elections was going on, war in Gaza, these big global issues, the Guardian chose this kind of indie beer campaign, this little beer campaign to write their editorial on. And because it had managed to get into the public conversation. We talk about those kind of water cooler stories. And I think that week when we launched, indie beer really became that. It was kind of the thing that people were talking about. And that is something which is incredibly difficult to achieve. And yeah, very proud of us doing that. And since then, in terms of our kind of budgets and what we're pushing and where we're spending our money, it's been predominantly social media, and that kind of been supported by press. And I think that has allowed us to reach outside of the beer bubble a little bit, reach out to kind of like normal consumers. And in terms of the content that we're sharing, actually, I think it's about 90% of the content we share in terms of the audience is non-followers. So people are sharing it. It's getting out beyond. I mean, I won't go as far as say it's kind of viral content because the numbers are not quite there on that, but it's certainly getting shared. So that's helping us reach out and helping us make the most of those kind of slim budgets that we have.
Fantastic. And so, I know that you did a presentation last week. What's some of the big numbers in terms of like how many people are seeing it, and how many people are now aware of the movement and what's going on?
Yeah, so we've got about 30,000 active users of the website now. So about 55,000 brewery checker searches. So one of the key things we've been pushing with the Indie Beer campaign is the brewery checker. So you can go on there, you can type in any brewery in the UK. You can also type in some of those. This was something we kind of updated just after we'd launched, actually. Any of those big brands. So you go in there and you type in Star Pramon, or you go and type in Madri, whatever. It will bring up information about those brands as well. But predominantly, type in any brewery, it'll say whether they're independent or not. And if they're not independent, who they're owned by. So that's just a really useful tool. If you're at the bar and you're like, do you know what? I don't know where these guys are based. Is that an independent brewer? Is that a kind of crafty brand that's kind of trying to trick me? And that's just something that I think has got into people's kind of common usage. It's been really, really brilliant to see the response and the support from organizations such as Camera as well. They've really pushed this. They've been, sharing this with all of their membership, with all of their kind of volunteer and support database. And I think people who are in the beer industry, or those kind of beer fans, have just started using it on a regular basis as a kind of tool. And actually, the amount of feedback we get and the amount of kind of responses we get from people, saying, oh, you've missed this brewery, or, this one's now opened, or this one's now closed. We get that on a daily basis. So the information on there is actually really, really up to date, really high quality, because there's lots of active users on there. In terms of kind of like getting the campaign out there as well, so getting it in front of people, getting awareness of the campaign up, that's something which we wanted to track on a regular basis. So we've done our most recent one, and these were the stats that we released last week as part of Indie Beer Week, and there's going to be a load more stats released as part of our independent beer report, which is coming out in a few weeks' time. But yeah, we found that around 1 in 10 consumers, about 11%, something like that, 1 in 10 consumers are now aware of the Indie Beer campaign. But actually amongst younger people, so 18 to 24-year-olds, it was 31%, which is nearly a third of 18 to 24-year-olds, the beer drinkers, so people who ever drink beer, now aware of the campaign, which for something that we launched, the end of last year, is beyond what we would have expected. I had some kind of like internal kind of like targets and things like that, I thought, I'm going to track this. And I would never have thought we'd be at 30% of 18 to 24-year-olds by this point. So it's clearly getting out there. And I think part of that is down to the subject matter, but I think it is more to do with the format. We're using social media, we're using press, we're creating some content which is kind of getting shared a lot, and that means that we are where those younger drinkers are. So yeah, it's going really well.
And that's phenomenal. Like we were saying just before we went live, that 30% and of that market is a real tough nut to crack for a lot of breweries and get in front of. And so why do you think the campaign has resonated so well with that age group?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So I think we see a lot of negative press around younger drinkers in general. So the main one is that a lot of them are not drinking. Mm-hmm. I think that is true. So I think that actual overall consumption of alcohol is certainly down. But what we're finding in the beer industry is actually that people are drinking less but drinking better. Other research we did, which we released last year, actually talks about what younger drinkers are looking for. And I think they're looking for more from the experience. So they see kind of going out, they see hospitality environments as you have to deliver a little bit more. They're not going to go out and drink 10 pints of Carling in a kind of grotty pub. They want to go somewhere where there's going to be good food available, where there might be a quiz happening or a Meet the Brewer event, or, whatever, some sort of event, some sort of reason to go there. And I think that's one of the reasons that this campaign has kind of resonated. There's really interesting stories there. Breweries themselves can be really interesting, and tap rooms can be really brilliant spaces for doing lots of other events. I mean, our tap room of the year at the moment is Brew York up in York, as you would probably guess. And that is such a brilliant tap room. And I think that is so good because it appeals to people not from beer first. Actually, people are probably going to go there because it's a really interesting looking space. There might be an event going on. There's fantastic food. if you look at something like Roosters up in Harrogate, really amazing live comedy and that sort of stuff. Loads of events going on, loads of family stuff. It's a great space. I've got young kids, and that's a great space where you can take a young family and things like that as well. Lots of stuff that's not linked to the beer. And I think that's attractive to younger drinkers as well, or younger consumers in general. So I think there's lots of good stories within the independent beer space, and I think we just need to get better at telling them and highlighting them, really.
Yeah. It's amazing to think that the narrative of indie beer is it's an independent brewery and therefore it's not the global big names out there. But actually, there's so much more body and depth to what being independent is, or that expectation, I suppose, from a consumer now of going like, if you're a good independent brewery, you're not just going to be doing the liquid. It's going to be the experience. It's a place where we hang out, where we eat, where we see all this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so the research is there. People want it. It's being received well. It's being received really well by other markets that younger consumers that you didn't quite possibly anticipate. Beyond a brewery going, we will use the term indie beer, like there's got to be ways that they can really embrace and get involved in this, because it can only lead to great things. Like what are your top recommendations for breweries and brewers listening who want to get on board with the movement?
Yeah, so we're putting lots of effort into kind of amplifying what the breweries are doing themselves. So there's lots of ways in which you can engage. Obviously, you can tag the campaign on social media. We've got someone helping out kind of full time on social media on that, which is really, really great, because it is a big ask. So yeah, make sure you're tagging us, make sure you're sharing it. Also, we've got Indie Beer Week at the moment, and you can submit your events via the Indie Beer website. So you go on there, submit an event, we'll publish it on there. Actually, there's loads of other events going on that we've kind of found that have not been submitted to us, which is great. We want to encourage loads of events to be happening. But I would say if you're doing an event, if you're putting all that work into doing it, let us know, because we can help you promote it. We're doing lots of press coverage, we're sending out press releases. We've got journalists calling us saying, right, so I'm covering this area, what events are going on? If we know about it, we can let those journalists know, we can help promote your business. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're a relatively small team, or a very small team. So we have to utilize press, we have to utilize social media. And that's the same for a lot of breweries. If you're a small brewery, you do not have the money to be spending loads on advertising, to be doing loads of affiliate marketing, or doing influencer marketing, that side of things. But what you can do is you can amplify what you're already doing via social media, via us. Use us as a tool, use us as a way to kind of amplify what you're doing. So yeah, make sure you put in some events on, make sure you submit them to us, make sure you're using social media to amplify those. And yeah, we can help kind of be a kind of loud hailer for what you're already doing.
That makes a lot of sense. It just, like you say, just broadcasts everything that's going on right now. What about in that conversation potentially where you're not directly involved, but the indie beer name can benefit the brewery? So I'm thinking between brewery and a pub owner, a trade owner.
Yeah.
How can they leverage the indie beer name and narrative to help better their cause?
So, I think the strongest argument is kind of going back to what we said at the beginning, is that we know that there's a demand for local. When we did some of that research again, it definitely showed that when people think independent, they think local. So they want to walk into a pub and they want to buy a product from the local area, whether that's sausages, whether that's burgers, or whether that's beer. And sadly, in a lot of pubs, actually, they'll make a big song and dance about the fact they've got local produce and local food and all that type of stuff, and then the beer won't be anything local. So people want to support local, people want to buy local beers, and these products that are owned by the globals are not delivering that that request from the consumer. So the strongest argument, I would say, is that you are actually what people are wanting to buy. And by being a genuinely independent brewery, you're what consumers are after. So you need to shout about that. You need to be proud of that. And there's plenty of space as well. We've got lots of pubs in the UK that currently a lot of them cannot have local beers on. We want to see better access, definitely, for independent breweries. But the strongest argument you've got is that consumers' demand is there. We know that there's lots of breweries closing. We know there's lots of breweries opening as well. But consumer demand is not the issue. It's access to market. It's getting in front of consumers. So yeah, if you can speak to publicans and kind of persuade them that what they need is a local independent beer, that is your strongest marketing tool. And the indie beer campaign is there to back you up. We're there to say that this is a real thing. This is something different to craft beer. It's not a flash in the pan. We're the real deal. So yeah, however we can help, we're here to do that.
So just coming back to those breweries who might be doing it great already, like if people wanted to check out socials and see great examples of people really leveraging the campaign, and who would you direct them towards?
Oh, I mean, there's some really great examples. So, I mean, I think that Attic in Birmingham have been fantastic. They've been huge supporters of the campaign. They're doing some great stuff this week on Indie Beer Week with a kind of a beer trail. So they've got these kind of Indie Beer Attic pin badges. So you visit the pubs, you get a stamp, and at the end of that, you kind of get this pin badge. They've been absolutely fantastic. But there's great examples all over the country. And actually, we've been trying to amplify all of these via the social media channels. So we've been doing kind of featured brewers. We've also been doing posts that kind of amplify what they're doing. It's not just a bit, Attica, well, not a big brewery, but they're probably one of the more well-known ones. There's really, really tiny breweries that are doing some brilliant stuff as well. Brolly Brewing, which are down in Horwich, I believe, not too far from me, actually. They've really embraced it, doing some fantastic stuff. Their brewery tap room was in the running for our tap room of the year. And the reason it was in there, even though it's a tiny, tiny little microbrewery, was because of their real commitment to kind of accessibility and inclusivity and that side of things. So even these tiny little breweries are really, really embracing it. It feels kind of a bit mean singling out a couple, but they're certainly the first two that spring to mind. But Attic doing it on a kind of bigger scale with kind of big, pub crawls across the whole of Birmingham, or something like Brolly Brewing, who've just done a load of really good community events on a small scale to their market, but really, really embracing it. So yeah, they're the two that I've kind of really enjoyed reading about this week.
Awesome. And then actually the implementation of like the IB stamp or the emblem or logo, whatever you might want to call it. I've seen it on caps, bottle caps, on labels, on cans, anywhere and everywhere. Do you give guidance on that, or is it just try and slam it wherever you can?
Yeah, we've tried to be as flexible as we possibly can. So I think one of the things we were really conscious of with this campaign and with the actual design of the logo itself is we know that your bottle and your can, you've got a lot of information to fit on there. With legislation and with the regulations around alcohol, we know you've got a lot of information you need to get on there. So for us to ask for some kind of real estate on there, we knew it needed to be something really simple. So the logo itself, and the reason it's got that big IB in the middle, is actually if you reduce it right down, you can still tell what it is. You can still be made aware of it. So we do have some kind of like rules around how you use it and things like that, and some advice. And generally, we would like people to use it in either black or white, rather than kind of lots of different colours. But yeah, we've tried to be flexible. We've also been working with a company called Croxons, who are kind of one of the leading closure manufacturers, so bottle caps essentially, and they've now sold over 500,000 of the Indie Beer bottle caps, about I think it's 560,000.
Wow.
So there's potentially 560,000 bottle caps out there with the Indie Beer logo on the top of them, which is absolutely phenomenal. And again, we've put money into that to subsidize it. So actually, when a brewery's going to buy bottle caps from Croxons, it's actually cheaper for them to buy a bottle cap with the Indie Beer logo than it is to buy even a plain bottle cap. So things like that is kind of where SEBA can help and put some budget and help breweries to get it out there. But yeah, the main thing is get it on your bottles and cans. The take up on that has been really, really good there. I think we know that obviously if you've got stuff in stock and your next print runs in 6 months' time and all that type of stuff, there's going to be a kind of slow amping up of the logo in it getting out there. But actually, it's massively exceeded our expectations. Breweries have adopted it really quickly. They've got it onto packaging quickly, and they've been using it really quickly. The other point of sale as well has been really well received. So as well as the kind of bottles and cans, we know that in the pub is probably the place where people are going to be most confused. It's the place where you are most likely to encounter a beer on draft, which is a global beer, kind of masquerading as a craft product. So we've got lots of point of sale there as well. So whether it's bar runners, we've got this kind of pump clip crowners with the Indie Beer logo, and also a kind of similar version for keg fonts as well. And the adoption on that has been fantastic. So again, I mentioned before actually, but Roosters Brewery up in Harrogate, I know they've adopted it and they've been kind of sending it out. When they send out a cask, they send out the pump clip and the Indie Beer kind of tab on top. So yeah, even if you don't get it onto your actual artwork, use that point of sale material that's there available to you, because consumers are increasingly aware of it. And, going back to another bit of press coverage that we got with the launch of the campaign, which was fantastic, was 12 different ITV news pieces all around the country. So there's an interview with myself, and there was an interview with I think it was Red Kelly from First and Last Brewery up in the Northeast. And then that was bookended with a local interview from an independent brewery, or I think there's one that was an independent venue. So that went out to 12 different regions around the UK by ITV. Really massive coverage. I mean, if we would have had to pay for that, we certainly wouldn't be able to afford it. But it would have been beyond the reach of most companies, to be honest. So consumers are getting increasingly aware of this campaign, and there's lots of ways which you can use it and use it as a tool to sell more beer.
And so how do breweries kind of get their hands on the logo to use and on the assets? Because I'm guessing you don't want them ripping it straight from Google. It needs to be reflected in the best way possible, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's a registered trademark. So as part of the process of registering, of setting up the campaign, it is registered with the IPO. So it's a registered trademark. To have some control over who can use that, we don't want to see it appearing on cans and bottles that don't qualify. So we have set definitions of who can use it. In a nutshell, and the full version of this is on the website, but in a nutshell, it's size, so less than 1% market share, brewed and sold in the UK, and not owned or connected to a brewery that doesn't meet that criteria. So not owned or linked to a larger brewery, a global brewery. That's it in a nutshell, but have a look on the website and it's got the full thing. So for SIBA members, obviously that's really clear. They've already signed up. We've got all the information. We can see that they meet that criteria. So SIBA members don't need to do anything. They can just go onto the kind of SIBA internal toolbox, or they can drop us an email. We'll send them everything they need. For non-SIBA members, they have to sign a licensing agreement. This is exactly the same as the Brewers Association do it in America. So non-members can be involved in the campaign. Non-members can use it on their packaging, but they have to sign a license agreement. And there's an administration fee as well, which is, relatively small, but that allows us to keep control of it. If it's just something which is totally public, not a registered trademark, we wouldn't have a kind of legal defense if it's being misused, but we do have that. So yeah, it's we try and be flexible, but we've also got to have some control for it to have some teeth, really.
I think it's completely right, and it should give everyone confidence knowing that you're part of the club, and you've been vetted and it's legit. I mean, I've got to ask though, have you spotted anyone being cheeky, and have you been made aware of it being swiped and used without the express permission of yourselves? You don't have to give names, by the way.
there's been a few where I've kind of gone, wow, they've used that in an interesting way, but it was more people that were definitely allowed to use it. So it's people who are fine to be using the logo, but they've just kind of like hacked its pieces a little bit. So that can be interesting. That's more my the design agency we've worked with dropping me messages saying, have you seen this? Why have they used it like that? But no, I've not seen any misuse yet. But yeah, if anyone spots on it, let us know.
Yeah, exactly. Get on them and DM. One thing I wanted to talk about is the content that you're creating beyond boosting and amplifying breweries' content that they create. Of course, you create your own content about insert global beer brand name is independent.
Yeah.
Next slide, they're not. And I've seen breweries then reposting that information.
Yeah.
Which in many ways can be fantastic. But is there any advice about resharing that information? Because when I think from a branding perspective, like it could be misconstrued as kind of like a poke or a nah situation, kind of like shining negative light on some of the bigger breweries out there.
No, it's a really good point, and we've been really, really careful in the kind of language that we use, because actually we're not making any comment on the quality of those beers. It's very difficult to argue against Budweiser being a pretty perfect beer. It's perfectly brewed. There's never any faults with it. The point is that people who are buying something which is owned by a global brewery, so someone who's buying Beavertown, might not know that that's owned by Heineken. And actually, we think that's a powerful enough message without going into, name calling and poking and saying, this is a load of rubbish. Why are you drinking this? You need to drink something better. that isn't necessary. People we know are trying to buy independent. We know that the demand for local beers is growing. So actually, we think that pointing out to those consumers who are buying those products that they're not independent, that they're actually owned by Heineken or one of the other breweries, that's enough. And we're really careful in that language, so that there's no kind of negative connotations. There's no kind of like, adding on to those memes or whatever you want to call them. That content is really matter of fact. It's just stating the truth. So that's what we would encourage. Any brewers that are getting involved in the campaign, any brewers that are sharing this stuff, don't be tempted to go down the route of criticizing, because it just isn't necessary. It's about education. And for those consumers that are already interested, for those consumers that are trying to buy independent, they'll care that it's not. So just kind of stick to your guns, I would say.
And so if I can ask you to kind of think back, because you have a long-standing history of like PR and marketing with various kind of beer establishments and associations. For a brewery, you've got the independent brewery narrative. Yeah. You have previous research that says that consumers want, eco-conscious breweries. You have them looking for, all-inclusive breweries and bits and bobs like that. If you were trying to position a set of core messages for a brewery, where would you be placing the independent narrative alongside all the other things that breweries need to try and communicate to appeal to as many people as possible, but stay true to who they are?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think the last line there, I think, is the most important one. I think staying true to who you are. I think most independent breweries and most people who set up a brewery, they are not getting into it to become a millionaire. They're getting into it because it's the love of beer. So lots of breweries are producing fantastic beer, and the message of the brewery and what they're all about is kind of secondary. So I would say, what matters to you? What are you trying to be? Are you trying to brew the best local lagers? Are you all about, sustainability and eco-friendly and all that type of thing? What is true to you as a brewery? And I would lean into that. And I think that the independent indie beer campaign and independent beer and this kind of movement is kind of supportive of that. It's about what you're all about and getting that story out there. You look at someone like Stroud Brewery, who have been kind of plowing their own path, B Corp organization, almost fully organic products, incredibly sustainable brewery. That's what they're all about. It's in the DNA. They're not doing it because they think that sustainability is something which is cool right now. That's what they're all about. You look at someone like Queer Brewing, that is, they're talking about inclusivity. They're talking about shining a light on a community which is perhaps underrepresented in the beer industry. That is what they're all about. And I think you just need to know who you are as a brewery and what you're setting out to do. And then your communications and your marketing should be amplifying that. And I think that the Indie Beer campaign can help support that. There's lots of different voices in independent beer. There's lots of different breweries, and there's kind of space for everybody. So yeah, work out what you are and be true to who you are, I would say.
Love it. Could not agree more as well. And just looking at the time, we have smashed through this conversation. So let's bring this to a wrap, Neil. Put yourself in a tap room or in a pub, and you're talking to a brewery owner that you've just met, and they've got 30 seconds of their drink left. What is that information you want to leave them with about the Indie Beer campaign, what they need to do, how they can make the most of it before they've got to run off and jump in a cab?
Yeah. So the Indie Beer campaign is about ensuring that the consumers that want to support independent, that want to buy local, can actually do so. We want to grow the market. We want to make sure that people who are interested in these types of products are actually getting their hands on them, and that every single penny that people want to spend with independent beer is actually being done so. People are not being fooled.
Love it. So Neil, if people want to know more, if they want to sign up, if they want to get involved or even ask more questions, where can we direct them?
Yep. So the main campaign website is indiebeer.uk, but you can also drop us an email through the website or at indiebeer@ceba.co.uk, and myself or another member of that very small team will come back to you as soon as we can.
Neil, my man, thank you so much. I've loved this chat. It's been brilliant. And those stats and bits and bobs that breweries can do, it's been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, boys and girls, and anyone else who's tuning in on the podcast, the video, wherever you might be, you all rock. Speak to you soon.